Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unboxed. I'm your host Pauline, and today, if this is your first time watching, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button on YouTube. And if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, we're also on there as well. Also, be sure to follow us on social media on Instagram and Facebook at the Unboxed Show. Just Unboxed Show. Today, I'm gonna introduce our guests, and we'll start with Stephanie. You can just do a little wave. Tunji.
Hello.
Travis.
Hi.
Adira.
Hello.
Abigail. Yuel.
What's up?
Ray.
How you doing?
And Delphina's ghost is here, so here in spirit. She's back. Okay, so today's episode, we're just gonna want to talk about essentially girls and guys when they're raised up in like a family structure, how those dynamics are different and how they're raised. So, for example, I think we've all heard kind of the argument that women are raised with pressure to end up as wives or mothers, and then men are giving more freedom while they're growing up in kind of that younger stage of life. So I'm just gonna open it up to the floor to get you guys' opinions on that.
I think men definitely don't grow up with the same pressures that women do. Like, there's no doubt about that. But I think there are pressures that we as guys feel, especially, getting into the stage of life that we are now. Like, we definitely, feel pressure to have our, careers in order so that, we're in a position where we can provide, because that's a lot of our image of manhood growing up, is like a man, being able to provide and, take care of his family, take care of his girl. We don't have the same maybe pressures that women do as far as like beauty standards and attractiveness, but at the same time, those things, do exist for us. And there's a lot of dudes who are gym rats because, if they don't look a certain way, then they become very insecure about that. So, I guess that's not a home, pressure, but, that is sort of a pressure that we deal with. But I would say, like, that's off the top of my head, that's probably the main thing that we feel, and we have to sort of get away from, is feeling like we have to be the main provider of the household all the time.
I also think a lot about how, as girls, we're taught to protect ourselves from predators, and how to be a lady when it comes to like sex, and the lack of ability for girls or even women to kind of explore their like sexuality. And so guys kind of have this freedom to just express their sexual like prowess and date whoever, whenever, and like doesn't really matter. Like, there's no restrictions on it. If anything, it's just like, maintain a certain level of respect. But I think for women, we always have to make sure that we're double checking our drinks, and make sure you wear certain, like, you have to be mindful of what you wear when you leave the house, and don't wear certain things when certain company comes over. And I feel like a lot of times with that hard, rigid, like, ways of like raising girls, it's a lot of it is like life survival skills, so you don't get raped or you don't get kidnapped or things like that. And sometimes I don't feel like guys get that same type of like training. And then again, it puts that victim blame and shame on girls, and women. When something does happen, it's like, well, what didn't you do to prepare yourself or avoid these situations?
I agree. It's okay if I talk?
Yeah.
Is that cool? Okay. I agree. I have a little sister who's 20 years old and I'm 25, and she's my best friend. And it's so interesting because I had an older brother as well. And when my brother and I started dating and we would have, go on dates with girls and whatnot, no one really batted an eye in our family. My parents have always been cool, but I guess like extended family, cousins and uncles, Nevertheless, when my sister, you know, grew up and she started dating, it was almost as if like people would approach me, almost with glee and be like, trying to like get a reaction, like, you know, your sister she has a boyfriend.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you feel about that? And when in reality, it's like, she's already, you know, me and her are close and we share, and she's told me everything, and you know, I'm so happy for her, and she's found someone that respects her. But it's almost as if like there's a demonization that's attached to Black women and their sexuality or their propensity to date and to be in relationships. And it's almost as if like there was this connotation of she's fast. I'm like, she's 17 and in a relationship, I'm sure she's cool, like it's okay. But when I was 17 and in a relationship, everyone's like, you in a relationship? I was like, all right. But like, and I don't know, I don't really understand, you know, especially I'm really blessed and I'm grounded because I have a really strong mother, and my younger sister, even though she's younger, I look up to her too. And I'm really close with really powerful, strong Black women in my life. So I'm by their grace, not by mine, but just through the blessing of having them in my life, I'm educated on what it means to be a Black woman and how the double standards exist, not just for women, but the intersection of race and gender for you guys, and how that often permeates into really unfair standards. And so I perceive it all the time, and it's annoying. And I've had to, whether it's at weddings or any family functions, on more than one occasion, I've had to kind of stand up and ride for my sister because it's corny and it's annoying, but yeah.
So it's interesting because I had somewhat of an opposite experience when I was 17, because all throughout high school and not until like my second year of university did I have a girlfriend. And not only did I not have a girlfriend, I wasn't even necessarily interested in dating at the time. And so my family was not actually, but they were low key worried, like, you know, like, what's wrong with this kid? Like what's going on? Like, you, oh man, like, what, you don't like girls? Like, what's going on? Like, why aren't you dating? And so, not to say that it's the same, but like, I guess I want to pose the question: is this thing that we see as like a sexual liberation for young boys, or like boys are allowed to do what they do, is that actually a pressure to get as many girls as you can? Because if you're not the type of dude who goes out and like is chasing girls all the time, then you're seen as like a different way. Like I've gone through that all the time, like literally because I respect women, and because I talk to them first as human beings, as not as something to, you know, conquer, my sexuality has been put in question by women who talk to me. They're just like, I feel comfortable around you. I don't feel like you're trying to get to me. So when I first met you, I thought you were gay. And
wow.
But that's how I was taught to, you know, treat women growing up, was like, treat them with respect, make sure you're not like, you know, objectifying them and blah blah blah. And so I have been wondering, like, is this thing that we call men have this freedom, is it actually this constraint? Is it actually like this pressure to act and be a certain way because that's what a quote unquote man does?
Yeah, I think definitely there's that pressure, even in the Caribbean. Because like when I was in high school, from like since age 13, 14, like my friends were like getting all the girls and blah, blah, blah. And I wasn't like that. Like I was very shy. I couldn't talk to women back then. And they were giving me shit, saying like, oh, you're, you know, gay and all of that. And it didn't really affect me, but I could see how it could affect other people. And I think it's a very big problem. Like they're really, really forcing you to live by this sort of standard of being like some sort of sex god or something. Like, yeah. So it sucks.
I also think there's a hypersexualization that's attached to Black men. I think that for some reason or another, like, we're expected to, like, I can't tell y'all how many times. First of all, I'm just gonna be very open and say that, like, at a very young age, I had to be turned off from. I was turned off from white women. Like, there's an element, there's a belief that Black men are supposed to, how do I say this like eloquently? They're supposed to be a certain way. Yeah, like they're supposed to, he's supposed to be this beast that like is so emotionally unintelligent one, and it's so just prone to like he's just a sexual fantasy for people to have and for people to conquest. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of the times we've internalized really harmful ideologies of ourselves and our own perception, and when we don't meet them, we start to develop insecurities in our own selves because we don't hold ourselves to a standard, or for some reason we don't meet the standard that non-Black people have placed on Black men. And it's a really dangerous fallacy to fall victim to, and it's really hard to unlearn. So I empathize with you with being a young Black man who is emotionally intelligent and who doesn't view women as objects or something to conquest, and how that somehow is misinterpreted into believing that there's something inherently wrong with us. I think that's bullshit.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually interesting points you brought up. And then Travis, I remember growing up. So I grew up essentially with a single mom, and so my personal experience was having a strong Black woman as my role model, and and then all her colleagues are essentially like role models as well. I was born in Nigeria, just for context. And so that kind of, to your point, my reference in terms of, at least from my immediate family, in terms of treating women, was coming just from like my mom and things like that. I didn't have any sisters, so it was kind of an interesting where it's all boys, no sisters. Again, with that immediate, but
We have the same background.
Model. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one where it's like my mom was like, mom's just, what I mean? But but then growing up and then kind of moving over here to Canada, and also just growing up, there's almost like, as a society, there's this internalized misogyny that we have, men and women, because it's almost like, it's like the status quo in a sense that's easy to default to. And I do remember the same thing where I was kind of more of when I was younger, I was more sensitive, because again, I just want to treat a woman or anyone just the way I would want to be treated, with respect and things like that. But on some level, it was interesting. It was almost like you never got no one to really talk to you, because it's almost like, what's wrong with this guy? Which is and it was an interesting thing, but that really played on my identity for the longest time, and to a point where after a while, it's almost like I had to. What I felt like at the time that I had to survive, so to speak, in terms of the dating world, was to kind of take on some of these toxic masculinity kind of thing, because like, oh, those are the guys that got attention from girls, or whatever, whatever you was going through at the time. Obviously, I was a lot younger at this time, and so for example, the whole thing was like, oh, like that guy, oh, that's the guy that all the girls talk to, the same guy. So what did this person do to be able to do that? So it's almost like this like warped sense of confidence that now you have to kind of put on this weird, interesting kind of behaviors. And after a while, you kind of start to build and kind of repeat that kind of patterns. And then you notice that it's almost like a downward spiral, right? So that's something that, personally, I was like, I guess that's what you got to do this. But obviously over years, and obviously doing a lot of reflection and self-work, and just now I look back and I'm like, what was going on there in that sense, right? But again, part of it was, for me, was a sense of identity that I was kind of like confused. And it's like, I guess that's what you got to do. But then it didn't really feel right on a deeper level, where you're like, well, I guess that's just what you do to survive in the streets, in a sense, right? So it's kind of an interesting one for me, where there's a lot of similarities there too, and it'd be interesting to get the take on the internal. I mean, I'm like in my mid 30s now, so I don't know what it's like for a bit of a younger generation, but I'd be interested to know if this internalized misogyny is still prevalent on both. I mean, I know genders are spectrum, but for the sake of this conversation, in a sense, is that internalized misogyny still all over the place, or is it kind of skewed into one end or the other? I'm just curious.
I think that, yeah, it is still prevalent, but I think as more women are kind of getting more independence, and also as a lot more people are getting more and more educated, our eyes are kind of being more open to the fact that, when you meet a guy who's misogynistic, as you put it, that's not the right person for you. As you go through experiences and you understand, even like just meeting different people, you start to understand more that type of behavior in the long run isn't right. And I think also with social media, I mean, we see a lot of different stories around the world of like, oh, this guy did this, or even celebrities. Like we joke a lot about Future, for example. And I think seeing that sort of thing on a daily basis, you start to just realize, okay, there's a lot of these type of men out there, and that's not what I want. I want the Russell Wilson. So you start to kind of adjust your preference. So I think that's what's happening.
I agree. And I also think it's good to see on social media as well that other, Black men are calling out behaviors like that Future kind of perpetuates is problematic, because it's a long time coming to see, more Black men taking accountability of, toxic masculinity and misogynistic behaviors. And sometimes it's kind of disdain or this hatred towards like dark-skinned women and things like that. And more men are speaking out, which is kind of really like a good transition to kind of see how the community is kind of coming together to highlight these issues, and kind of break down these, generational understandings of gender and masculinity and femininity, and just kind of gathering this more healthy understanding of masculinity and what it means to be a man. Doesn't mean you have to degrade a woman. It's just showing respect just for people in general, treating people with respect, listening to folks, supporting people, practicing some form of solidarity. And I think it's great. But I still think, sometimes that dominant culture where there are a lot of men who still listen to the Future kind of perpetuate these ideas. And then there are some that do kind of have this internalized misogyny that also hinder men being vulnerable. So for you, Ray, if you're dating, you're choosing not to date, and then there are women that may just assume that you're gay, and it's just maybe I don't feel like dating right now, or maybe you just not my type or whatever, or maybe I focus on other things. Sometimes women, we need to make sure that we need to allow other identities of manhood and masculinity to come to fruition, and not just assume that somebody is gay if they're not dating right now, or if they don't see an interest in somebody right now. And if they are gay, so what?
I was gonna say, I think it comes from, I don't know, can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
you're good. Sorry, I came in late. I do African timing, sorry. But hope you guys are all well. I was gonna say that I think even saying, the assumption that somebody might be gay, I think a lot of it also, the underlining issue is that if you show a little bit of any feminine characters, for example, you can be a little bit loving, you can be a little bit you might like certain colors and a lot of things. I think it also has an underlining of homophobia. Homophobia is not something that's 21st century thing. It's a forever thing. It's in the Bible. So a lot of it is, it's not that there's something wrong with women. It's that, they want that clear distinction, because if you show anything close to that, you might be assumed gay, because being gay is not okay, as it's told by so many cultures. So in order for that distinction to happen, they had to make, looking like a girl is wrong, or wanting something that a girl wants is wrong, and things like that. The underlining issue is that there is a lot of homophobia and things like that, that you think that a little bit of, a certain character can be categorized as you being gay, or if you don't want to date at the moment, that you can be gay, and all these things. It's not just being a misogynistic person, it's also being homophobic. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I think the idea of sort of your ability to date multiple women, or I guess pull multiple women. I think a lot of times, particularly when we talk about the Black community, I think it's attached to your masculinity, right? If you're able to get multiple women, you're seen as being more masculine. And if you're not, then you're seen as being feminine and also possibly gay. So I'm just wanted to kind of ask the group in general, where do you think that idea came from? Because I think, of course, when you talk about where values come from and where how we're conditioned and socialized in certain aspects, it usually comes from the family unit. And so I'm wondering, where did that idea come from, particularly when it comes to Black boys? And how you say slavery?
Everything comes from slavery, I feel like.
All right, expand, please.
Well, I'm not gonna say slavery directly, but just
All
the
right.
process of trying to insert ourselves as like a part of like being citizens in North America, and just this idea that we are human. So how can we assert ourselves as human beings under these scopes of like manhood and womanhood? So as a woman, I want to be feminine. I want to be taken care of. I want to, be a housewife or whatever that may look like. But I think also for sometimes for Black men and their Black manhood, it's very particular because they do want to have this power and this privilege that we have seen through like white privilege. And so this understanding of manhood is very important to asserting themselves as like human beings. So being so dehumanized from slavery and Jim Crow, and then this whole process, post-slavery, it's like, okay, we are human. We are also men because we can do all of these things, and sometimes that's where the problem comes in when we're trying to overcompensate this understanding of manhood. And I always try to make sure that Black men kind of understand doing a little too much ultimately kind of hypersexualizes yourself, and you don't want to do that either. So I think finding, again, just kind of healthy representations of like manhood that doesn't harm other people in the community, but also doesn't harm yourself.
Right.
I think it has a lot of like religious background, in my opinion, because there are some countries, like for example, the East, the East African countries, they faced slavery, but it was more so colonization. North Africa as well, colonization versus slavery. Slavery within the countries can happen too. But I think a lot of these ideals and a lot of these things that we still practice to this day they have a religious background and cultural background, though white supremacy and all of these things, like the way we hypersexualize not only Black men but Black women. There's what's her name, there's this slave, a Black woman that was put in museums for her to so it's not only Black men, but these things also date back to religious beliefs where in some religions the more wives you have the better it is, because they want to expand the religion. There's so many beliefs even in cultures and whatnot where the more you have the better, because you're expanding your pretty much your seed, is how they say it in our culture. So it's very, I would personally, I don't know if I would have to do more research, but I think there's also cultural aspect to it where it does go back to like centuries and centuries and centuries. But it is definitely enhanced with colonizing and colonization and slavery and whatnot, because in order to put down an entire race, there needs to be aspects of it where you can break down the people, hate each other and hate themselves and all of these things, so I think it goes way back, personally.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was going to mention that, and there were times when white people were raping Black people to take away their humanity. It really take that away, and that sort of trauma has a way of passing down to generations. So I think that's another factor in this whole thing. I think kind of compensate.
Emasculation as well. Like I know a lot of hoteps use that word, like the emasculation.
yeah. I was trying to avoid that word.
Word.
That's really what I thought about. Just like Black men have been so emasculated. It's like we have to re-masculate ourselves.
Emasculate.
Yeah.
But the reason why a lot of Black men feel that way is because a lot of us feel like our manhood, quote unquote, is all we have. Like, we're disrespected for being Black, like all the time. That we already have like a lot of disadvantages, but like the one thing that we have to hold on to is our manhood, like the one thing that garners respect around, the workplace or in our homes, or like, just walking down the street, is the fact that, I'm a man and you got to treat me like a man. So like, I'm able to protect myself. I'm able to fight, like whatever the case may be, like, I should be getting like respect, around my wife and kids, because I'm the one who's providing, like the lifestyle, like there's just like all these different types of things. And so, like a lot of time, like, a lot of times, like if a black man gets accused of having feminine qualities, that's why, you know, he'll react, you know, as big as he does, because, you know, like, what are you trying to say, that I'm not a man? Because like if I'm not a man, then, you know, then all I am is black, and we know like black isn't really helping me that much around here. So, you know, I'm a man, you know what I mean? So I mean that I've thought a lot about that, and like I think that's what it is. Just like a lot of times our manhood, as harmful as it might be, and as much of it as it is a sort of a construct, a lot of times that's all we have, you know. So
that's a good point.
I just want to pivot to also just talking about how girls are raised. I think a lot of girls, you hear them say, oh, my dad is so overprotective, or my brothers are so overprotective. And a lot of the times when you ask guys why they're like that, they say, oh, it's because I know how guys think. Because, you know, and maybe a lot of the times too, what they're trying to avoid or spare their sister or female cousin or whatever from feeling, they've done to some other woman out there who's also a daughter or a sister. So what do we think about that overprotection? Do you think it's warranted also because of the kind of society that we live in? It's like, it's a pretty dangerous world for women. I mean, for example, Vancouver is a pretty safe city, but like, I would be very cautious still about walking on the street by myself. So yeah, do you think it's warranted, that overprotection? And also something to pull on as well is, I don't know if you guys heard about the story with T.I. going to his daughter's
that was horrible.
Can I just say
to check if her hymen is
I don't think, personally, I have 5 brothers, right? I have 5 brothers, and my dad, they've never been overprotective, but we always discuss this, and I think it's just the feeling of owning a woman, you know, feeling like you can control a woman's body, you can control what she's done, like she's doing, and all of these things, you know what I mean? If you really want to protect a woman, you can take, for example, for me, you know, if my dad was really, you know, he was just really scared for me when I started working downtown, and I was just like, if you're really scared, I could like go and learn how to what do they call it? Not boxing.
Self-defense.
Self-defense, you know, so many things that actually could help me protect myself instead of being under control, where like, you have to come home at this time, you have to do this, you have to do that, you know what I mean? And so there is a part of it where I strongly believe that men do feel like they can own women's bodies, and T.I. is a perfect example, you know what I mean? By checking her hymen, which is scientifically so wrong, you can't, like, there is no correlation. And so part of that is, you know, the way, if you've watched like their reality TV show, whatever, the way he raises his sons is the same exact way, where it's very toxic. He wants them to have multiple women. I know, like, so many things that are so wrong, versus when it comes to his daughter, he's like, you can't be doing this, you can't be doing that. That's not protection. Protection is actually equipping a person in ways that they can protect themselves, you know. I do feel like when, you know, men, like brothers or cousins or whatever, dads are like, you can't do this, you can't do that, you don't own a person. You can't tell a person not to do something. You could, if you're so scared about a woman's safety, you can move to a different, I don't know, a safer neighborhood, equip them with so many self-defense, whatever. But I do personally think that it comes from wanting to own a woman, because it's such a generational thing, where like, we've seen it in the past, we've seen it like centuries ago, where it, like, you know, it's pretty much like you own a woman like you own animals. That's how it is.
Can I add something to that? I think there's this notion of people were thinking that men, some men are that way, but men want to control, men want to be empowered. You know, I'll speak for myself, and I'll speak for some certain people that I know as men. If we go back as men, we are conditioned to be protective for something we care about, right?
That's true.
You care about something, you want to protect it. That's just the way men are conditioned, right? There are men out there that makes that protection look bad. let's cancel those men off. I'm not talking about them right now. But I have 4 sisters. I'm extremely protective because I care that much. I would never want to see them hurt, because if I ever see my sisters hurt, I am
you see red.
Right? Like, exactly. Well, there's this. We don't, like, women are conditioned to be nurturers, right? They take care of things. They wanna make things better. But what we know is protect. That's just what we know how to do. And time goes on, that old-fashioned, that quaint way of thinking, that, is your way or the highway. But I think times have changed, that you need to communicate with your daughter or your wife or your sister. That communication is something I think we're lacking nowadays. I don't think men are ever going to stop being protective. I don't think that's ever going to stop. But I think we need to evolve with it, in the sense of communicate with the person that you're trying to protect. You have to understand what they like and what they don't like, right? You can't just protect someone like, well, I'm doing this for your own good. But you got to understand that your time and this time is absolutely different, right? And I think for men, I'm always going to be protective of my sisters, even my mom, and she's my mom, and I'm going to be protective of her. It's just the way we can.
I think what I'm trying to say is that, protection, 100%, a lot of people and like men are conditioned to be protective, you know what I mean? They were the hunters, they were the gatherers, whatever, and women were nurturers. But what I'm trying to say is part of being protective, and like we've mentioned, misogyny being underlining of so many issues, that there is a part of our culture, and we're all Black, we're all like we go back to like we're all African, so we can relate when we say our cultures do in some ways make it feel like men can own women. I'm not saying that they're you can protect a woman. You can say that she's whatever, my sister, she's my mother, she's blah blah blah, I have to protect her. But there's a certain level of sometimes where you have like, they're not you, but like generally speaking, where men feel like they can tell a woman what to do. Does that make sense? Like there is a certain level of like where you feel like you have the entitlement to tell tell women what to do, telling a woman to come home at a certain time, to like do this and that because I care about you, I want to protect you. There are some things that are like they have an underlining issue where like that goes unchecked. You know what I'm saying? There's a back in the day, I don't think it doesn't happen, but in my country, in some villages, a woman can't own a home, she can't own land because she doesn't know how to take care of it. So in order to the man to protect them, blah blah blah, from like other invaders or whatever it is, she's not allowed to buy land for some stupid reason, because she can't do this and that. So a man has to protect her, a man has to whatever, she has to be married to own a land, blah blah blah. So there's so many things that we don't necessarily think about that like it's whatever protection, but the underlining thing is that there's a certain level of entitlement that men feel towards women.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Like in a modern society, what does this protection look like? Because when you were talking about, the hunter-gatherers, okay, I get it. Maybe, if a lion comes to attack the village, okay, the men are arming up to protect you. But like in this sort of like, how are you protecting me? That's what I'm still confused about. Like, so
telling you when to come home.
Yeah, telling me what to do. Is that how you're protecting me, or are you actually doing something?
I think it's also like this understanding that women don't have the ability to protect themselves. So it's like, well, you can't protect yourself, so I'm gonna do it. Yeah. And it's rare that some girls may have a father or a brother that may teach them how to fight, or who can shoot, and they trust that their sister or daughter or whoever, if they go out or whatever time, they can protect themselves. But there's this general understanding that women don't have the strength to defend themselves against strong men or whoever just comes with some wild stuff. And so I think, to go off what you're saying is just understanding that we just can't do it. So we have, so these men in our families will have to make these manipulations in order for them to understand, or for us to understand that we are protected under their like eye.
But if I'm going to the store, they're probably not gonna be with me, like to fight for me or something like that.
Yeah, but I feel like there's also like your mild cases and your extreme cases.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I think for a lot of us, we have like the mild cases where our dads are like, come home at a certain time. But there are parents that really police like their daughters to where like they police in their outfits, phone calls, friends, outings. Yeah. You ain't going to the grocery store by yourself. You can't drive, like, and then that's when they become very sheltered. And then when it's time for them to leave the house, and these, girls are just clueless because they haven't had the opportunity to make their own mistakes or learn from certain situations. And so when you have these very extreme cases, then it becomes very problematic and quite harmful.
Yeah. It's kind of like how, sorry. I was just gonna throw in like a statement where it's like, how we say, oh, I want a man who's like so 6 whatever big so that they can protect me, blah blah blah, all these things that like when I think about it, I at the end of the day, it's just feeling like someone is there to protect you, what I mean? We have a saying that in Abuha Kamtilal, which means like your dad is like your umbrella because he protects the family. It's just that his presence almost like is the protection. Like you can't disrespect a woman because she has a good dad. You know what I mean? Or like she has a dad that protects her. It's not necessarily like a physical aspect, but like the respect. They respect you because you have like brothers. If I tell someone that I'm on a date with or something like that, I'm like, yeah, I have 5 brothers. Even if they're younger than me, they're like, oh, 5 brothers. There's a little bit of like a value to that. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily just like protecting you to go to the store. It's just that respect as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just with regards to what modern day protection looks like between a man and a woman, whatever dynamic that may be, whether it's a man and his partner and she's a woman, or a brother and a sister. For myself, I feel as if women are very nuanced and idiosyncratic. Like you can't paint every single woman as the same individual who needs the same things. And I think from what I've learned as a man approaching this topic is that communication is instrumental in any relationship dynamic. And I know I mentioned my sister before, but my sister, I've always let her know that if she ever needs my help and requires my help, I'm there for her. I've communicated that to her since we were young. I've never been the brother that, spies or like tries to question who she's dating and if they're like, what are they doing and what time will you be home? I think that's always just been a corny thing, and I just always communicated to her, and I've been very open and transparent that I'm her big brother, which means whenever she needs me and what she needs me to do, I'll do it, and when she needs me to do it. I think a lot of the time the notions of autonomy and agency, like especially for women, they're viewed as privileges when in reality they're rights, and I think there's a fine line between wanting to protect your whatever, like a woman in your life, and then owning her. And I just think communication and really asking and inquiring what it is that you could do to make them feel safe, and adhering to the guidelines that they provide you. Communication is key.
Yeah, no, communication is absolutely like everything. And like I feel like a lot of times, like whether we're older siblings or parents or stuff like that, a lot of times we think we're showing love to like our young girls by restricting them. Like in our minds we're protecting them, but then like we're restricting them, and then they feel restricted, and then we're not communicating with them about why we're protecting / restricting them, and then it like leads to this whole bad thing. But just to sort of like give like some of the women in here some perspective about like how some men think, like, okay, like the stuff that you guys said about the things that you need to be careful of, like walking down the street alone, watching your drink, like not putting yourselves in positions where like a man could be aggressive. We also, I have a younger sister and a younger cousin who I'm like, like I also really, really don't want those things to happen to my sister and my cousin, right? I don't restrict them at all. I let them live their lives, but I really, really do not want these things to happen. If something were to happen to my little sister, man, like, puts his hands on her or something, puts something in her drink, something happens to her on the street, y'all gotta understand, I'm going to jail.
Word.
Like I'm going to jail.
Word.
My mom, I can already see it. Something happens to my sister, my mom could be right over there. Tunji, don't do anything. Tunji, don't do anything. Just let the police handle it, whatever. I'm like, yeah, cool. I am on my phone all day until I find the dude who did something to my sister. I am going to jail. If I'm not in jail, I feel like I haven't done my job. Straight up.
Word.
Like, you can't, like don't do anything to my family. Don't do anything to my people. Like, that's how we, and so I think because we know, at least for me, I can only speak for myself, because I know how far I would go to make sure that nobody ever messes with my people again. I can see how other men who feel the exact same way would rather go for sort of extreme preventative measures. Like, that's how they deal with it. It's just like, okay, I really, really don't want this situation to happen. It would break my heart. I would lose my mind. I'm going to do everything to make sure that doesn't happen. But the downside to that is just like, these young girls and these young women end up feeling really restricted and resentful. And that's why the communication needs to be there. Like, I feel like more men need to say that to their daughters or to their sisters. It's like, if something happens to you, I'm going to see red. And that's it. Somebody's gonna die.
Word.
I totally relate to what Tunji's saying, because like when I look at it from the perspective of trying to protect my sister, it's like it's tough because you kind of have to find that balance. It's like, are you willing to like be overprotective and risk her resenting you, or like are you trying to like have her like be willing to experience like communicate with her, but like giving her freedom so that she can actually like experience life and like not hate you, you know what I mean? Because like with that, if you give her that freedom, the risk of her being like hurt by somebody, it does go up, you know what I mean? Like, so it's a hard decision to come to as like someone who's an older brother. Obviously I don't want her resenting me. I don't think that's ever like anything is ever worth that. So I totally feel with what Yul was saying when he was talking about communicating with your sister, because I try to have conversations with her all the time about like ways that I can help her out, but at the same time I can't shake that feeling in my head like, oh my god, like I can't always be around to protect her, and there's so much messed up things happening to females out there that like it almost pushes me over the edge sometimes, just thinking about it, be like, yo, like I gotta be a little bit more like stern and like, you know what I mean? But I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't want her hating me, so that's what stops me from like going over that edge. But like, man, like Tunji said, man, if something ever happened,
jail.
The reason why I would go to jail is because I would partly feel responsible. You know what I mean? Because I would feel like, oh my god, I could have been more proactive about it. I could have been more preventative about it, but I didn't. I was too soft, and now this happened, so I have to solve it on my own. I have to kill somebody.
I think a point that I would make, like, just one more point. I know, Pauline, you want to switch, but I think a final point that I would make is that like we may be tiptoeing around it a little bit, but like when we talk about protecting like women or whatever, you have to think about what are we protecting them from? Other men, right? Is that like, let's be honest, let's be real. Like that's really what it is. So I think at the end of the day, like we need to get to a point where like, are we as men, are we going to accept society as it is and be like, yo, these things are going to keep happening, and we just have to, do our best to protect like our siblings or like our, the women in our lives? Or are we going to now start to try to talk to each other about how do we stop, how do we stop rape culture? How do we like actually be bold enough to like talk to our bros or talk to our guys? Because I don't know if you guys watch Insecure, but like there was an episode recently where
spoiler,
someone my bad. All right, and I can't, it's not really a spoiler, honestly. That scene was not really a spoiler. It was just like a little throwaway conversation. But someone has a child, like he's a parent, and he's having a conversation with his friend, and he's like, yo, like, thinking about how I used to treat women, like it's crazy to think like I'm gonna have a child and someone's gonna treat, because he has a daughter, right? He's like, someone's gonna treat this daughter bad or whatever. We don't really humanize women until we have women in our lives. So like people say, oh, this is someone's daughter, or like this is someone's mom, or this is someone's sister. Like you need to say those things to begin to treat them well. So I think like at the end of the day, we need to be honest about like either we're going to accept things for what they are and admit that, like, okay, like a lot of the danger that women face comes from men, or we're going to start being brave and having those conversations with each other as men, so that we can get to a point where, like, this isn't an issue and we don't need to worry about going to jail because we went to shoot someone who touched our sister. So anyway, that's I think we'll switch.
No, I was just gonna say, I think it's really interesting just hearing how the men go about protecting women in their lives. But I think it'll be helpful for the women in this conversation to express how they feel they'll be protected by men and what they would like that to look like. And I think that's important. So.
Can I?
Yes, please.
With what Pauline was saying, I feel like the conversation did kind of spark around like how men feel like they have to protect the females in their life. And obviously, Idris, I know you don't mean this in a negative way, but I just feel like if sometimes like the mentality of even like for parents or for like anyone like in a relationship is like, how do I give this female her freedom if it's still coming around like the source of like control. Like it's like there's like objectifying, and obviously like there's the other side of that is just like the expression of care. And I do agree, like there are some instances where like certain people, not just females, can put themselves in situations where you could say like, how could I have dealt with this better? But at the same time, I don't feel like society has enough conversation, or maybe there is, that is just like, you literally should have raised your son differently, and it's kind of just like how I agree, like women, like females, yeah, like you should take self-defense classes, not just because it's just like, yo, I live in a very sketchy neighborhood and I think I need to protect myself. It's more like this is something like I enjoy, like rather than that just being like the first thing is just, I don't know. I don't like the idea of having to give girls like rape kits, like a rape whistle, here's mace, here's all this, like keep these things with you when you're walking around at night. It's just like, like these are things I'm being taught, but like I don't hear enough conversation or like implementation of like teaching younger boys from a very young age, treat others the way you want to be treated. And like I like, for me, like if anyone does anything to me, I'm sure like all of my brothers are gonna like be on this dude's ass or whatever, but at the same time I feel like still there's that instance of like showing that violence is like the way to solve the problem, which is basic, like sexual violence. There are all these things that just like extend on like how females can get hurt. And like the way I would like to be protected is like, yeah, tell me all these things that I need to do to be aware of, but at the same time bring my younger brothers or bring these other males to the table, and like I guess this is what we're doing right now, like generate more conversation of like how we want to feel safe like around each other, kind of thing.
I was just gonna say the same thing, that I feel like the statement that was made is that men say that we are protecting you because we know what other men are like. But it's like in the same way that when we're younger, we are taught to protect ourselves and not open our legs or whatever, but our male counterparts are like applauded when they've lost their virginity or whatever. It's like, what if we were both raised the same way and we're both told to protect ourselves or whatever? Then they wouldn't need to protect us from all these other guys that they know are just like them because they too are on the prowess or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes it does come off as policing, like what we should and shouldn't do. And just even thinking about just sometimes the conversation, like men feel like I put in so much work to protect my sister and my daughters. And it's just like, put in that same amount of work to check your friends or have this conversation with your homeboy. Because a lot of times when women say, well, men are trash, it's not just out of this space of dating and like problematic dating. It's like different men we have met, whether it's a professor, a teacher, some guy at Starbucks, or wherever, a really weird uncle or somebody. It's not, coming out of this whole issue of just dating. It's the institution and the ways in which men treat us, and how certain forms of like sexual harassment is so prevalent in our experiences, that it is a lot of labor for us to protect ourselves. And while my dad does a great job of like educating me on protecting myself, it's like I already know, like as a woman, bad things will happen to me. Like I just know that. And so I always have to take these precautions. Like, yeah, I do need to go get gas, but shit, it's 11:30 at night. Is this the best option? It's like all of these extra things that we are already aware of, like these extra like safety precautions we have to take to ensure like we're safe. And so I really just hope that as we move forward, you know, like Black men are having these conversations to their friends, because we, as women, we hear these conversations all the time. We see these narratives all the time when it comes out with like rape and the victim shaming and the blaming. It's the same conversation over and over again. Like, what did she do? What did she do? What did she do? What did she do? And it's never like this accountability of how can we teach men to better control themselves, or how can we better teach men to interact and respect women? And it's like, put that energy and that labor into your friends or your social circles or whatever.
I was just gonna say, can I ask a question? Crap, I feel like I lost the question as soon as I opened my mouth. But when it comes to, I guess when it comes to like protection and whatnot, I always often think about like, are my brothers good to other women? Like they're protective of me and my sister, but are they good? Like if anything happened to me or my sister, like what Idris was saying, they would absolutely kill that person regardless of what that is. They're willing to go to jail for that. However, are they being good to other people? Just like, you know how they say, oh, what if that was your sister? What if that was your mother? It's because a lot of men can't imagine that certain thing happening to someone unless if it's someone that is related to them. They can't humanize women unless it's someone they can they can't conceptualize a woman being hurt unless you give a reference to them where it's like, oh, it could be your sister, it could be your mother, blah blah blah. But you know, like I can confidently say, oh yeah, my brothers would do this for me, they would blah blah blah. But am I confident enough to say that I am educating my brothers, or my dad's educating my brothers, or my mom is doing that to ensure that they're not out there hurting women? Because at the end of the day, the same way that we say that could be your sister, your mother, blah blah, that could be your brother, that could be your friend, that could be your whatever, harming other women, and they're going unchecked.
And I don't think that correlation is mutually exclusive sometimes. Like, because when we try to say, oh yeah, what if it was your mother, it's your sister, they don't matter. Like that's their mom. Like you're not their mom or you're not their sister, so they're not going to treat you automatically the same because they love their mama.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just, because we're kind of short on time, so I gotta.
Okay.
But what do you guys think about using marriage as a tool to kind of have, like, let's say there is a daughter and a family, and you know it's now time in the father's head to marry his daughter off, so that now she can have more protection. She can have a husband that is going to protect her, and even the husband's family. What do you think about that in like modern society versus also maybe, because some people say that makes more sense in like maybe a poorer country where if the father can't protect his whole family because there's a lot of children and things like that, so he needs to marry the daughter off to another family to have her protected that way.
I feel like that, I mean, I would imagine that wouldn't work at all, because, you know, in a modern society, like, you know, I have like a lot of women in my life have told me that they've grown up like watching like, you know, Disney movies and stuff like that, where they're told that, you know, Prince Charming is coming and that they're going to find true love. So I feel like a situation where their father is arranging a marriage for them or whatever the case may be, I feel like I just feel like that just wouldn't work even a little bit. I don't know. But.
Or even just like the pressure of them to find someone, maybe not
find someone for them.
The dad forcing them to marry someone specifically, but just having them get married.
I think that like as women, we're known, like we're supposed to get married. That's like an achievement for us. So I don't think it always necessarily comes down to like the protection part. I think it's seen as an achievement for a woman to be married and to be a wife and to have kids and things like that. I know that's like one of the major pressures that I feel right now as like a 25-year-old who's single, where every conversation that I get on with whether it's with an uncle, with my grandma, with my cousins, it's like, hey, like, when are you gonna get married? When are you bringing a man to the village? Like, and it's just like, it's not an achievement. Like, you know, getting married is not supposed to be an achievement. So I don't think it comes down to like protection of the man, but I think that as women, getting married is seen as an achievement. So
it's your lifetime goal.
And what's funny about that is they'll allow our male counterparts to go and date and do whatever they want. Meanwhile, we're supposed to just stay at home and learn to cook and do all these things. And we turn like 20 something, they're like, where's your husband? Am I supposed to download him off the internet? Like, I didn't do anything. What do you mean?
And like, even as women, like, we're just raised essentially to be mothers. Like, we're not raised like our male counterparts. We're never raised as like, yeah, you can achieve the same things as your brother does. Like, it's always like, hey, like, did you learn how to make a goosey this week? And it's like, I think that like, it's like, we're raised to be mothers, we're raised to be wives, we're raised to be like caretakers, and that's the achievement that we've been given as like women.
And then you're putting
like,
it on the line if you don't aspire to do any of those things. You know, if you don't or have kids.
Do you guys think that like millennial women are like the first generation of women who have the collective thought that we can be more than just mothers and wives? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No.
I don't think so.
I actually don't think it's our generation. I think it's the generation before us, because like my mom was a breadwinner for our family. So like, I think that when women were allowed to now be properly educated and actually go out to get masters and become whatever they actually wanted to, I think that happened with our parents, not necessarily like our generation. Right. But I think they're able to do both. I think for our generation, we just don't want to. We want to have the option not to do both. Like, we want to, you know what I mean? Do you get what I'm trying to say? Like, our parents' generation, they got married and they had the career. Our generation is more along the lines of like, I want to choose to be married.
I think for our generation it's a little bit different, because I do think a lot of, for one, I'll say even for Black women, historically, Black women have always just kind of been independent or the matriarch of the family. So I feel like that's just culturally and historically something that's always embedded in us. But I do think now, like with a lot of millennial women, we are like CEOs of our own companies, and we also just kind of okay with this idea and kind of pushing for this idea of being a very independent woman, and we are getting multiple degrees and things like that. So kind of redesigning like this imagery of this nuanced version of like womanhood, of the things that we can accomplish, and not just being a working class woman, which is not a problem, but just knowing that our mothers have worked so hard to bring us to where we are. But now we have so many other opportunities and avenues to kind of do things that our mother hasn't done. So maybe I want to date 4 or 5 different guys, or travel by myself, or have the freedom to get multiple degrees or whatever. And then again, that kind of positions, you know, Black women differently, because now it's, when it comes to dating, it looks a little bit harder for us, because we don't see as many of our counterparts excelling as well as we are. And sometimes men do feel intimidated because we may have 1 or 2 degrees, or we may have more money, or we may be a business owner. And some guys may not be feeling that. And then, or it's just, as women, it's like, I'm not feeling that either. You know, like, I may be, you know, 40 with no kids and no husband. It's like, okay.
Like the saying of, what is the Nigerian writer? We teach women to shrink themselves.
Chimamanda Adichie.
Yes, I'm really bad with names, but yeah, I think it's not only just the generation before us. I think it's been a very long fight for women to have even basic rights, and I feel like it's an ongoing battle. It doesn't mean because I'm free right now to do what I want to do. I know someone my age, my cousin back home that still lives back home, doesn't have the same rights as I do. You know what I mean? Just because I'm able to do this in this generation. There was a woman that was able to do the things that I'm able to do now. White women were allowed to do that like a long time ago. We weren't, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, and you know, in the Western world, you absolutely can. There's so many, you know, unless your family is very still traditional, there's so many ways that I am technically free, but there's so many ways that sexism now looks differently than it did back in the day. You know what I mean? It's an ongoing battle, and it's a generational battle that, you know, the transitions have been happening slowly, where now we're talking about, oh, it should be my freedom to choose when to marry. Before it was, you know, you have to marry this person that we bring you. You know what I mean? And that's still a practice back home. There's still, that's a practice everywhere. You know what I mean? But it's a slow transition. It's a very, very gradual transition. And sexism definitely looks differently now than it did back in the day. You know what I mean? Now I can vote, but now I don't have the option still, whether if I want to have an abortion or not. You know, there's so many things that are still an ongoing conversation. And I don't think the progress is necessarily individual aspect, where like your family can be progressive, but you know, just because I'm free to do so many things that my family's okay with doesn't mean other women are not. You know what I mean? Or it doesn't mean other women are allowed to do. So I see it as as a collective. I don't think we're as free as we think, and it's definitely, it's not just a generation before us, but so many generations. My great grandmother, I mean, my aunties and all of those, they fought in the war. They did everything that man was supposed to do. All these things, you know what I mean? So I think it's been an ongoing battle, but we just see it differently now.
And even with Black women in like pregnancy, that's like a scary thing for a lot of us. And so it's like, yeah, I want to have kids, but am I going to survive that? You know? And the way that works is completely, you know, it's insane to me.
Yeah.
I just wanted to go off of also what Ariam said. I think like women have always had the collective thought that they want to be more independent. It just took a lot of fight. I mean, from a North American context, women only got the right to vote like in the 20s. And that took a lot of fight.
Black women were in the 60s or so. So there's also differentiation when it comes to race. You know what I mean? So,
right. And I think it also correlates with like industrialization and globalization. I think really why a lot of women were getting more freedom was because now, you know, they need more workers, because the world is now being more and more connected. So we need more bodies to be more all hands on deck. And with things like inflation too, now the average family can't just have a one person in the household earning. So, you know, now let's tag in the woman. And I think through those things, that which also kind of just more benefited men as well. I think women started to get more and more rights and more independence. And so, yeah, that's my opinion on that.
I was just thinking about how, specifically in America, I know a couple of years ago, it was all over the news, and it was really heartwarming to see that the number one demographic in America that was the most educated was Black women. Yeah. Nevertheless, it's interesting because it's like Black men, we're very aware of the vexations and the systematic oppressions that are geared towards us specifically as Black men, when in reality, and like historically speaking, Black women they always have, you know, they ride for us, they always protect us, they always do what they can to support us and to fight for us, when in reality I feel as if like a lot of the times there's specific systematic forms of oppression that are specifically geared towards Black women. And so, yeah, they might be the most educated demographic in America, but what about the pay gap that exists for Black women? And so, you know, Black women can become independent, and they can be extremely educated, and they can be very comprehensive in terms of their competence and skill level. But what are the, you know, there's an amalgamation of different types of forms of oppression that specifically attack Black women. Like, I think only recently in America, if I hope, at the expense of sounding ignorant, there's only 3 states in America that have passed a law where it's illegal to fire Black women for wearing their natural hair in professional work settings. Like there's an amalgamation of different things that are specifically geared to, again, attack Black women. And so I think it's always interesting that, yeah, sure, Black women, I like in my life, on the TV screens and in the entertainment industry and sports, they have been shown to, you know, be more than capable of being independent and being successful and not relying on any man or another individual to thrive and be the most successful. But I think a lot of the times we, especially as Black men, we have a tendency to forget that, you know, there's some forms of oppression that we'll never experience, that Black women stay experiencing all the time. And it doesn't even matter if they're the smartest or if they're the most educated or if they're the most, you know, skilled or competent for the job. It's they fight different battles in us a lot of the times, and I think we just need to be, at the bare minimum, knowledgeable of that and respectful of that. Yeah, I don't know if that's something.
No, that makes sense. Okay, cool. I think we can end here. Thank you everyone for watching and listening, and please remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and give this video a like, and you can also share with us your thoughts on the topics that we discussed today in the comments below. And if you're listening to the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review. So yeah, that's all for today, and we'll see you next time, hopefully. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.